The satchel was still warm when Elena Marsh picked it up, as if someone had been holding it only seconds before. She stood frozen on the empty platform, her breath catching in her throat, staring down at the leather bag lying half open beneath the wooden bench. Rain had started to fall, soft and cold, but she did not move. Her hands trembled as she crouched and touched the edge of the bag, and what she saw inside made her heart stop for one full second. Money. Stacks of it, wrapped in paper bands, more cash than she had ever seen in her entire life. Beside the bundles sat a heavy gold ring, carved with a crest she did not recognize, and a folded set of papers sealed with wax. Elena looked left, then right. The station was empty except for a stray dog sniffing near the tracks, and an old lamp flickering above her head. No one had seen her. No one was coming. She could take it. She could walk away right now, and no one in the world would ever know. Her mind raced through everything this money could fix. Her younger brother, Daniel, lay in a hospital bed only a few miles away, his fever rising every night, his cough growing worse by the hour. The doctors had said the treatment he needed cost more than she could earn in 3 years of sewing dresses for wealthy women who barely looked at her. Rent was due in 4 days. The landlord had already warned her that if she missed one more payment, she and Daniel would be out on the street before winter came. This bag could solve everything. Elena closed her eyes and pressed her palm against her chest, trying to slow her racing heartbeat. She thought of her mother, long gone now, and the words she used to whisper before bed. Whatever you find that is not yours, leave it as you found it, or return it as a whole person. Her mother's voice felt closer than ever in that dark, rain-soaked station, as if she stood right behind her, watching. She picked up the satchel anyway. Not to keep it. Not yet. She told herself she only wanted to see who it belonged to. That curiosity alone pulled her fingers toward the folded papers inside. She untied the small string holding them together and read the top page by the weak light of the lamp. The words on the page made her breath catch again, this time for a different reason. It was a letter, addressed to someone called Nathaniel, signed by a woman whose name she did not recognize. The letter spoke of a child, born in secret, hidden away from a family that would never accept the truth. Elena's fingers froze on the paper. She had stumbled into something far bigger than money. She wrapped the papers back together and placed them beside the cash, her mind spinning. The seal on the papers and the crest on the ring both showed the same symbol, a hawk with wings spread wide over a shield. She had seen that symbol before, stitched into the collar of a coat she once repaired for a wealthy client. It belonged to the Ashcombe family. Everyone in the city knew that name. The Ashcombe estate sat on the hill above the river, a mansion with more rooms than she could count, owned by a duke so private that few had ever seen his face. Elena carried the satchel home that night, holding it against her chest like something that might shatter. Her small apartment welcomed her with silence and the smell of damp wood. She placed the bag on her kitchen table and sat across from it for nearly an hour, simply staring, as if it might speak and explain itself. She did not sleep. She sat awake through the night, running her fingers along the edge of the satchel, thinking of Daniel's pale face, thinking of the rent that would come due, thinking of the years she had spent working herself thin just to keep both of them alive. No one would blame her if she kept it. No one would ever know. The Duke likely had more money hidden away in a dozen other places. To him, this loss would mean nothing. To her, it meant everything. But there were also those letters. Private, painful, secret. If she kept the bag, she would be stealing not only money, but a piece of someone's most hidden truth. And something about that felt heavier than any coin could ever weigh. By the time the sun rose over the rooftops, casting a pale orange light through her small window, Elena had made her decision, though it took everything in her to make it. She rose from the table, splashed cold water on her face, and dressed in her cleanest coat, the one with a small tear near the collar that she had never had time to mend. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror by the door and whispered to her own reflection, as if convincing herself one final time, "It is not mine." She wrapped the satchel carefully, tucking it beneath her arm, and stepped out into the misty morning street. The walk to Ashcombe Manor took nearly 2 hours on foot, since she had no coin left for a carriage. Her shoes soaked through within the first few streets, and her legs ached long before she reached the hill, where the grand iron gates stood waiting. She had never been this close to the estate before. The gates alone stood taller than her entire apartment building, twisted with iron vines and topped with the same hawk crest she had seen on the ring. A gatekeeper appeared from a small stone hut beside the entrance, an older man with tired eyes and a thick gray coat. He looked at her with suspicion, the way most people looked at someone dressed the way she was dressed, standing somewhere she did not belong. Elena did not explain herself. She only held out the satchel, her arms shaking slightly from the weight of both the bag and the decision behind it. "This belongs to your master," she said quietly. "I found it near the train station last night." The gatekeeper's eyes widened as he peered inside the bag, seeing the same stacks of cash and the same gold ring she had seen hours earlier. He looked back up at her, stunned, his mouth opening to ask her name, to ask how she had found it, to ask 100 questions that suddenly crowded his face. But Elena had already turned. She walked away quickly, her pace increasing with every step, refusing to look back even once. She did not want gratitude. She did not want questions. She did not want anyone connecting her tired face and worn coat to the small act of honesty she had just completed, because honesty, she had learned long ago, sometimes brought more trouble than it solved for people who had nothing. By the time she reached the bottom of the hill, tears had begun sliding silently down her cheeks, though she could not fully explain why. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was fear over what she had just given away, money that could have saved her brother's life. Perhaps it was something else entirely, a strange lightness in her chest despite everything, the feeling of having done something right in a world that rarely rewarded such choices. She did not know that behind those iron gates, her small act of honesty had just triggered something far greater than she could imagine. She did not know that the man who owned that satchel would spend the coming weeks turning the entire city upside down, searching for the woman who returned his fortune, without asking for a single coin in exchange. She did not know that hidden inside those letters lay a secret capable of shaking his entire family to its foundation. A secret only she now shared with him, though neither of them yet realized it. All Elena knew, walking home through the wet streets with empty hands and an aching heart, was that she had just given away the only chance she had to save her brother's life, and she had no idea how she would face him when she returned to the hospital with nothing to offer but her presence. The hospital room smelled of medicine and old linen when she finally arrived. Daniel lay against the pillows, his face thinner than it had been the week before, his eyes brightening slightly when he saw her enter. "Did you bring anything?" he asked weakly, trying to smile despite his exhaustion. "You look tired, sister." Elena forced a smile onto her own face, sitting beside his bed and taking his small hand into hers. "I brought myself," she said softly. "That will have to be enough for today." Daniel studied her face for a long moment, the way younger siblings sometimes read older ones better than anyone else in the world. "Something happened," he said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes." Elena squeezed his hand gently, unwilling to burden him with the truth of what she had found and given away. "Nothing happened that you need to worry about," she said. "Rest now. I will find a way. I always do." But even as she spoke those words, she was not entirely sure she believed them. The rent remained unpaid. The treatment remained unaffordable, and somewhere on a hill she would likely never see again, a wealthy man she had never met, now held in his hands a bag of secrets she had chosen to protect, with nothing but her own conscience. She did not regret her choice, not truly, though the weight of it pressed against her chest the entire walk home. Some decisions were not about calculation or survival. Some decisions were simply about who a person chose to be when no one else was watching. And Elena Marsh had chosen honesty in a moment that could have easily excused dishonesty. What she could not have known, sitting in that dim hospital room with her brother's hand in hers, was that her small act of returning a stranger's fortune had already set into motion a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever, in ways neither of them could yet begin to imagine. Nathaniel Ashcombe noticed the satchel was missing before he noticed anything else that morning, and the moment he realized it, his entire body went cold. He had left it in his study the night before, tucked behind a shelf of old books, believing it safer there than in his private chambers where servants passed through at all hours. When he entered the study at dawn and found the shelf bare, his mind raced through every possible explanation, each one worse than the last. He tore through the room, pulling books from their places, checking beneath the desk, behind the curtains, inside the fireplace grate, though he knew, even as he searched, that panic alone drove his actions rather than logic. The satchel held more than money. It held the only physical proof of a truth he had spent years hiding from his family, his staff, and the entire society that watched his every move with hungry curiosity. He rang for his butler immediately, an older man named Edmund who had served the Ashcombe family for over 30 years and knew the household better than anyone alive. "Has anyone entered my study since last night?" Nathaniel asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Edmund studied his master's face carefully before answering, sensing the unusual tension behind the question. "No one that I am aware of, sir," he said. "Though I should mention, a satchel was returned to the gate this morning. The gatekeeper brought it to me not an hour ago, believing it belonged to you." Nathaniel's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and confusion so sudden it nearly stole his breath. "Returned," he repeated. "By whom?" "A young woman, sir. She did not give her name. She left before Thomas could ask a single question." "Bring it to me immediately," Nathaniel said, already moving toward the door. When Edmund placed the satchel on the desk minutes later, Nathaniel opened it with hands that shook more than he cared to admit. The money sat exactly as he had left it, every bundle in its place, untouched and uncounted. The gold ring remained nestled in the corner exactly where he had tucked it, and the letters, folded and sealed just as he had left them the night before, sat waiting at the bottom of the bag. He lifted the letters with trembling fingers and checked the wax seal, unbroken. Whoever had found this satchel had not opened the letters, had not read the words that would destroy everything he had built to protect his family's reputation, and, more importantly, to protect a child who had done nothing wrong except exist outside the boundaries society deemed acceptable. Relief flooded through him first, warm and overwhelming. But relief quickly gave way to something far more complicated. Someone out there had held the deepest secret of his life in their hands, and chosen, without hesitation it seemed, to walk away from both the fortune and the truth, without taking either. "Who was she?" he asked Edmund, staring at the satchel as though it might answer him directly. "What did she look like?" Edmund hesitated, clearly regretting that he had not paid closer attention. "Thomas said she wore a plain gray coat, sir, with a small tear near the collar. Young, perhaps in her early 20s. She spoke only a few words and left immediately, walking toward the lower city." That description could belong to hundreds of women across the city, and Nathaniel knew it. Yet something about the image formed in his mind refused to leave him alone. A woman poor enough to wear a torn coat, desperate enough that this money likely would have solved real problems in her life, and honest enough to return it anyway, without asking for so much as a thank you. He sat in his study long after Edmund left, staring at the fortune spread across his desk, feeling for the first time in years that something had shifted inside him. He had grown so accustomed to people wanting things from him, flattering him, circling him at social gatherings hoping for favors or connections, that genuine selflessness felt almost foreign, almost impossible to comprehend. Later that afternoon, he called for his carriage and rode down to the train station where the satchel had apparently been found, though he was not entirely certain what he hoped to discover there. The platform looked ordinary in the daylight, filled with travelers hurrying past each other, none of them aware of the quiet drama that had unfolded there the night before. He questioned the station attendant, an older man with a limp who remembered seeing a young woman sitting alone on the bench late the previous evening, though he could offer little more detail than that. "She left before the last train," the attendant said, scratching his gray beard thoughtfully. "Looked troubled if you ask me. Sat there a long while, before finally standing and walking off toward the lower streets." Nathaniel thanked him and stood on the platform a moment longer, staring at the empty bench, imagining the woman who had sat there discovering a fortune large enough to change her entire life, and choosing instead to walk away from it. He could not shake the feeling that he needed to find her, though he could not fully explain why gratitude alone did not seem sufficient reason for the urgency building inside his chest. That evening he sat with his sister Charlotte in the drawing room, turning the gold ring over and over in his fingers as the fire crackled beside them. Charlotte watched him with the sharp attentiveness only a sibling could offer, noticing immediately that something troubled him deeply. "You have been distracted all day," she said, setting down her book. "What happened?" Nathaniel considered lying, considered brushing off her concern with some vague excuse about business matters, but exhaustion and confusion had worn down his usual guarded instincts. "I lost something important last night," he admitted quietly, It was returned this morning by a stranger who wanted nothing in exchange. Charlotte raised an eyebrow, intrigued. That sounds like cause for celebration, not distress. It is more complicated than that, he said, though he offered no further explanation, unwilling even now to reveal the truth about the letters hidden inside the satchel. Charlotte did not press him further, sensing the boundary he had drawn, though her curious gaze lingered on him for the rest of the evening. Nathaniel barely slept that night. He lay awake staring at the ceiling of his grand bedroom, surrounded by wealth that suddenly felt strangely hollow, thinking about a stranger who had walked away from more money than most people earned in a decade, simply because it was not hers to keep. He thought about the letters she could have read, the truth she could have exposed to ruin him socially, the leverage she could have used to demand anything she wanted from him in exchange for silence. Instead, she had asked for nothing at all. By morning, he had made a decision of his own. He would find her, not merely to thank her, though gratitude certainly played a role in his resolve, but because something about her act of honesty had cracked open a part of himself he had kept sealed away for years, buried beneath duty and reputation and the endless demands of his title. He wanted to understand what kind of person chose integrity over survival when survival clearly hung in the balance for her. He called Edmund into his study once more, laying out his plan with quiet determination. "I want you to make inquiries throughout the lower city," he said, discreetly. "Find out if anyone matching her description has been seen recently near the train station or the surrounding streets. I want to know her name." Edmund studied his master carefully, sensing the shift in him, though he did not fully understand its cause. "Might I ask why this matters so greatly, sir?" he asked gently. "The fortune has already been returned. The matter could easily rest there." Nathaniel paused, considering the question longer than Edmund likely expected. "Because," he finally said, "someone in this city chose to do the right thing when doing the wrong thing would have been far easier and far more understandable given her circumstances. I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who calculate every kindness for personal gain. I want to know the person who did not." Edmund nodded slowly, though a flicker of concern crossed his weathered face, the kind of concern only decades of loyal service could produce. "As you wish, sir," he said, "though I would caution you to consider carefully what you hope to find, and what such a search might reveal, both about her and about yourself." Nathaniel barely registered the warning in that moment, his mind already racing ahead toward the search that lay before him. He did not yet understand how deeply intertwined his search for this mysterious woman would become with the very secret she had chosen to protect. Nor did he understand that finding her would eventually force him to confront truths about his family, his past, and his own heart that he had avoided facing for far too long. Meanwhile, across the city, Elena Marsh returned to her small apartment that evening, carrying nothing but a loaf of bread and a heavier heart than she had carried in years. She had visited 3 different moneylenders that day, each one turning her away once they learned she had no property or valuables to offer as security for a loan. The rent remained due in 2 days, and Daniel's treatment remained impossibly out of reach. She sat at her kitchen table, the same table where the satchel had rested only a day earlier, and allowed herself a rare moment of quiet grief over the choice she had made. She did not regret returning the fortune, not truly, but the weight of what that choice now cost her pressed heavily against her chest as she stared at the empty space where the bag had once sat. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it cautiously to find her elderly neighbor, Margaret, standing in the hallway with a small pot of soup in her hands. "I made too much again," Margaret said, offering the familiar excuse she used every time she brought food to Elena's door, though both women understood the truth behind her kindness. "Take it before it goes cold." Elena accepted the soup gratefully, tears threatening to spill over despite her efforts to hold them back. "Thank you, Margaret," she whispered. "You have no idea how much this means right now." Margaret studied her young neighbor's tired face with knowing eyes. "Whatever burden you are carrying, child," she said gently, "you do not have to carry it entirely alone. This street looks after its own, even when the rest of the city forgets we exist." Elena closed the door after Margaret left and sat once more at her table, eating the warm soup slowly, allowing its comfort to settle something restless inside her chest. She thought about the man whose fortune she had returned, wondering briefly what kind of life he lived behind those enormous iron gates, wondering if he had even noticed the money was missing before it was returned, wondering if her small act of honesty had meant anything at all to someone who likely possessed more wealth than she could imagine. She had no way of knowing that, only a few miles away, that very man now lay awake thinking of her, determined to uncover her name, unaware that the search he had just begun would eventually lead him not only back to her doorstep, but straight into the heart of the secret she had unknowingly chosen to protect, and into a connection between them that neither poverty nor privilege would ultimately be able to keep apart. 3 days passed before Edmund returned to Nathaniel's study with anything resembling useful information, and even then, what he brought felt more like a fragile thread than a solid lid. He explained that a shopkeeper near the train station remembered a young seamstress who often walked that route late in the evening, returning home from delivering finished garments to wealthy clients across the city. The shopkeeper did not know her name, only that she lived somewhere among the narrow streets near the old textile district, and that she cared for a sick younger brother. Nathaniel absorbed this information carefully, turning it over in his mind as though examining a puzzle piece that might not even belong to the picture he was trying to complete. A seamstress with a sick brother. It was not much, but it was more than he had possessed the day before, and something about the description settled into his chest with a strange sense of certainty he could not fully justify. He decided against sending servants to investigate further, worried that a direct approach might frighten the woman away before he ever had the chance to speak with her himself. Instead, he chose a different path entirely. The city's largest charity market was scheduled to open that weekend, an annual event held in the square near the cathedral, where wealthy families donated goods and coin to support struggling households across the lower districts. Seamstresses often attended such events, either to sell simple mended garments or to collect donated fabric for their work. If the woman he sought lived and worked in that world, there existed a real possibility she might appear there. Nathaniel rarely attended such gatherings himself, usually sending Charlotte or a trusted representative in his place, since his presence tended to draw unwanted attention and endless requests for favors from ambitious families hoping to secure his influence. But this year, he decided he would attend personally, dressed plainly enough to avoid immediate recognition, hoping to observe the crowd without drawing the usual fanfare that followed his title wherever it appeared. Charlotte noticed his unusual interest in the event almost immediately. "You never attend the charity market," she said, watching him select a plain gray coat instead of his usual finely tailored attire. "What has changed?" "I simply wish to see the city as it truly is, for once, without the weight of expectation following me everywhere," he answered, though even he recognized the answer felt incomplete. Charlotte studied him a moment longer, clearly unconvinced, though she chose not to press the matter further. "Very well," she said. "I shall accompany you. Someone needs to make certain you do not accidentally offend half the merchants in the square with your usual bluntness." The morning of the charity market arrived cold and bright, the cathedral square filled with tables and stalls arranged in long rows, crowded with people from every corner of the city. Wealthy families mingled awkwardly among laborers and tradespeople, exchanging polite conversation over baskets of donated bread and folded clothing. Nathaniel moved slowly through the crowd, his sharp eyes scanning every face, searching for a woman he had never actually seen, relying only on the vague description Edmund had gathered days earlier. He had nearly given up hope of finding her among the sea of unfamiliar faces, when he noticed a young woman near the far end of the square, kneeling beside a table of mended clothing, carefully folding a child's coat, before placing it into a basket for donation. She wore a plain gray dress, her dark hair tied back simply, her expression focused entirely on her work despite the noise and movement surrounding her. Something about her quiet concentration, the careful way her fingers smoothed each fold of fabric, caught his attention in a way he could not fully explain. He approached slowly, unsure exactly what he intended to say, only knowing that something pulled him toward her table rather than any other in the crowded square. "That is fine work," he said, gesturing toward the neatly folded garments before him. The woman looked up, startled slightly by his sudden presence, though she recovered quickly, offering a polite but guarded smile. "Thank you," she said. "I try to make sure the children receiving these have something warm, even if it is second-hand." Nathaniel studied her face carefully, searching for some sign, some confirmation that this was the woman he sought, though nothing about her appearance offered proof beyond his own instinct. "Do you sew professionally?" he asked, keeping his tone casual despite the racing thoughts behind his calm expression. "I do," she answered simply. though the pay rarely matches the effort involved. He nearly asked her name in that moment, the question sitting right at the edge of his lips, but something in her cautious posture made him hesitate. She held herself the way people held themselves when life had taught them to be careful around strangers, especially strangers dressed in fine coats despite their attempt at plainness. He did not wish to frighten her away before understanding more. "I am Nathaniel," he offered instead, extending his hand. The woman studied his offered hand for a brief moment before accepting it politely. "Elena," she said. "Elena Marsh." The name settled into his memory instantly, though he gave no outward sign of the significance it might hold. He continued their conversation a while longer, asking simple questions about her work, listening carefully as she spoke about the challenges of supporting herself through sewing alone, though she offered no personal details beyond what seemed comfortable to share with a stranger. He found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation, drawn to her quiet intelligence and the careful, thoughtful way she chose her words, entirely unaware that this same woman had held his deepest secret in her hands only days earlier. Charlotte appeared beside him eventually, curious about the woman who had captured her brother's attention for far longer than any casual market conversation typically warranted. She introduced herself warmly, and the three of them spoke for several more minutes before Elena excused herself, explaining that she needed to return home before evening fell. "It was lovely speaking with you both," she said, gathering her basket of folded garments. "Perhaps we shall see each other again," Nathaniel offered, unable to keep a note of hope from creeping into his voice. Elena offered a small, uncertain smile in response, one that suggested she was unaccustomed to wealthy strangers expressing genuine interest in seeing her again. "Perhaps," she said simply, before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Nathaniel watched her go, his mind spinning with questions he had not thought to ask. Questions about whether this quiet, careful woman was truly the one who had returned his fortune, without a single word of explanation. Charlotte watched her brother's face with growing curiosity. "You seem rather taken with her," she observed lightly. Nathaniel did not deny it, though he offered no explanation either. Instead, he turned the conversation back toward the market, determined to keep his suspicions private until he could confirm them with certainty. That evening, back at the manor, he called Edmund into his study once more. "Elena Marsh," he said, "find out everything you can about her, quietly and with respect. I believe she may be the woman we are searching for." Edmund raised an eyebrow slightly at the name, but nodded without question, already turning to leave the room to begin his discreet inquiries. Nathaniel remained alone in his study long after Edmund departed, staring once again at the satchel that still sat upon his desk, thinking now not only of the secret it had nearly exposed, but of the woman whose quiet strength had protected it, and whose face now lingered persistently in his thoughts. He did not yet know the full extent of what she had sacrificed to protect his secret, nor did he understand how deeply her own life had been shaped by hardship and loss. But something told him, sitting alone in the flickering candlelight, that the answers he sought about Elena Marsh would reveal far more than simply confirming her identity. They would reveal a story of sacrifice that mirrored, in strange and unexpected ways, the very secret he had spent years hiding from the world. Across the city, in her small apartment, Elena sat by candlelight, mending a torn sleeve, her thoughts returning again and again to the man she had met that afternoon. There had been something disarming about his attention, something that felt different from the polite indifference wealthy clients usually showed toward her when she delivered their finished garments. He had asked real questions and listened to her answers as though they genuinely mattered to him. She pushed the thought aside quickly, reminding herself of the vast distance between their worlds, a distance far too wide for anything beyond a single pleasant conversation at a charity market. Yet as she finally blew out her candle and settled into bed that night, she found herself wondering, against her better judgment, whether she truly would see Nathaniel again, entirely unaware that he had already begun quietly working to ensure exactly that outcome, and unaware that the truth of what she had returned to him was about to draw both of their lives together in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Edmund returned 3 days later with a folder of careful notes, his expression grave as he laid them upon Nathaniel's desk. He had spoken quietly with neighbors, market vendors, and even a nurse at the city hospital, piecing together a picture of Elena Marsh that struck Nathaniel far harder than he had expected. "She lives with her younger brother Daniel, who has been gravely ill for several months," Edmund began. "The hospital records show he requires a specific treatment, one involving imported medicine that few families in the lower city could ever afford. Elena has attempted to secure loans from 3 separate moneylenders in recent days, all of whom refused her, given her lack of property or valuable possessions to offer as security. Nathaniel listened in silence, his jaw tightening with each new detail. When, he finally asked, did these loan attempts begin? Edmund checked his notes carefully. The same day the satchel was returned to our gates, sir, he answered quietly. The weight of that timing settled over Nathaniel like a stone dropped into still water. Elena Marsh had discovered a fortune large enough to save her brother's life, a fortune that could have paid for any treatment, any doctor, any medicine required, and instead of keeping it, she had walked it straight back to his gates, without a single word of explanation, without even leaving her name. She had chosen honesty over her own brother's survival, chosen it in a single night, alone, with no one watching to judge her either way. Nathaniel sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the full weight of her sacrifice pressed down upon him. He had spent years surrounded by people who calculated every act of kindness for personal advantage, who offered favors only when favors might be returned tenfold. Elena Marsh had given up everything, quite literally the life of her own brother, and had asked for absolutely nothing in return. He rose from his desk abruptly, pacing the length of his study as his mind raced through possibilities. He could send money to her immediately, could arrange for Daniel's treatment without delay, could solve the entire crisis with barely a fraction of his considerable wealth. Yet something held him back from acting too quickly. He remembered the guarded pride in Elena's posture at the charity market, the careful way she had spoken of her work, never once hinting at hardship, despite clearly living within its grip. A woman who returned an unclaimed fortune, rather than keep it for her dying brother, was not a woman who would easily accept charity, however desperately she needed it. He needed a different approach, one that respected her dignity, while still ensuring Daniel received the care he required. That evening, Nathaniel visited the city hospital himself, dressed once again in plain clothing to avoid unwanted attention. He found the ward where Daniel Marsh was being treated and spoke quietly with the attending physician, a tired but kind man named Dr. Whitfield, who had clearly grown fond of his young patient over the weeks of treatment. The boy's condition has worsened slightly this week, Dr. Whitfield explained, glancing at his notes. Without the imported medicine soon, I fear his chances will continue to decline. His sister visits every single day, without fail, though I suspect she has exhausted every possible avenue for raising the funds required. Nathaniel nodded slowly, watching through a small window as Daniel slept fitfully in his hospital bed, his face pale and thin against the white pillow. He thought of Elena sitting beside that bed night after night, carrying the crushing weight of her brother's illness, alongside the guilt of having given away the very money that could have saved him. I would like to arrange payment for his treatment, Nathaniel said quietly, anonymously. His sister must never know the source of the funds. Dr. Whitfield studied him carefully, recognizing something familiar in his features despite the plain clothing. You are the Duke, are you not? He asked directly. Nathaniel did not bother denying it, sensing the doctor's discretion could be trusted.
I am,
he confirmed. But this is not about titles or reputation. A great debt is owed to that young woman, one she does not even fully understand herself. I intend to repay it in whatever way I can, without robbing her of the pride that clearly means everything to her. Dr. Whitfield nodded slowly, understanding settling across his tired features. I will arrange for the treatment to begin immediately, he said, and I will ensure the source remains entirely confidential, as you wish. Nathaniel left the hospital that night, with a strange mixture of satisfaction and unease churning inside his chest. He had taken action to save Daniel's life, action that would ease Elena's suffering considerably, yet something about the secrecy required to protect her pride felt incomplete, as though he were still hiding behind walls rather than facing her honestly. He returned to Ashcombe Manor to find Charlotte waiting for him in the drawing room, her expression curious as she studied his tired but determined face. "Where have you been all evening?" she asked. "You have barely spoken a word about this Elena Marsh since the market, yet I can see clearly that she occupies your thoughts constantly." Nathaniel sank into the chair across from her, finally allowing himself a moment of honesty with his sister. "She is the one who returned the satchel," he admitted quietly, "the one who found everything, and chose to give it back without asking for anything in exchange." Charlotte's eyes widened with surprise, quickly followed by a soft, knowing smile. "That explains a great deal about your recent behavior," she said gently. "What do you intend to do now that you know her secret?" "I have already arranged for her brother's medical treatment," he said. Anonymously, "I could not bear to let him suffer any longer, knowing what she sacrificed to protect our family's secret." Charlotte reached across and placed a gentle hand upon her brother's arm. "That is a kind and honorable choice," she said. "But Nathaniel, you cannot hide behind anonymity forever. Not if what I suspect about your feelings toward her holds any truth. Eventually, she will need to know the full extent of what connects the two of you, both the debt you owe her, and whatever else has clearly begun growing in your heart since that market afternoon." Nathaniel said nothing for a long moment, staring into the fireplace as Charlotte's words settled over him. He knew she was right, knew that secrecy could only protect Elena's pride for so long, before the truth inevitably surfaced between them. Yet he also feared what might happen once she discovered the full truth, feared that learning he was the very duke whose secret she had protected might change everything between them, might introduce a debt and obligation into what had, for one brief afternoon at the market, felt like the simple beginning of genuine connection. Meanwhile, at the hospital the following morning, Elena arrived for her usual visit, to find Dr. Whitfield waiting for her with unexpected news. "Miss Marsh," he said gently, guiding her toward a quiet corner of the ward. "I have wonderful news regarding your brother's treatment. The necessary funds have been secured. His medicine will begin immediately." Elena stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Secured," she repeated slowly. "By whom? I have not paid anything toward this treatment." "An anonymous benefactor has come forward," Dr. Whitfield explained carefully, choosing his words to honor Nathaniel's request for confidentiality. "The details of the arrangement must remain private, as per their wishes, but I assure you, the funds are entirely legitimate, and your brother's treatment will proceed without any further delay." Elena's knees weakened beneath her, and she reached for the nearby wall to steady herself, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions she could barely process. Relief crashed through her first, powerful and overwhelming, followed quickly by confusion, and then a creeping suspicion she could not quite name. Who would offer such generosity to a stranger, without explanation, without any expectation of repayment or gratitude? She thought immediately of Nathaniel, of the kind stranger she had met at the charity market only days earlier, though she quickly dismissed the thought as impossible. He barely knew her. Their conversation had lasted only a few minutes. Surely a man of his wealth and standing would not concern himself so deeply with the medical troubles of a seamstress he had only just met. Yet the suspicion lingered, refusing to fully release its grip on her thoughts, as she made her way to Daniel's bedside that morning, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, unaware of just how deeply and unexpectedly their lives had already become entangled with the mysterious Duke, whose fortune she had once held, and released, without asking for anything at all in return. Elena could not shake her suspicion over the following days, though she told herself repeatedly that chasing such a thought served no practical purpose. Daniel's health improved steadily with each dose of the imported medicine, his color returning, his cough weakening, his tired eyes brightening a little more every time she visited. Relief filled her chest whenever she watched him laugh at some small joke or eat an entire meal without struggling. Yet beneath that relief sat a persistent, nagging question she could not fully silence. She decided, on the 5th day after the mysterious funding arrived, to return to Dr. Whitfield and press him further for information, though she suspected he would remain as tight-lipped as before. "I understand you cannot reveal the benefactor's identity," she said carefully, choosing her words as they stood together outside Daniel's room. "But could you at least tell me whether this person expects anything from us in return? Repayment, perhaps, or some form of service?" Dr. Whitfield studied her for a long moment before answering, clearly weighing how much he could honorably share. "I was told explicitly that no repayment is expected, nor any form of gratitude required," he said. "The benefactor wished only for your brother's recovery, and for your peace of mind regarding the matter." Elena frowned slightly, unsatisfied despite the reassurance. "That seems remarkably generous for a complete stranger," she said. Dr. Whitfield offered a small, knowing smile that told her nothing directly, yet somehow confirmed everything her instincts had already begun to suspect. "Sometimes, Miss Marsh," he said gently, "generosity finds its way back to those who have shown generosity themselves, in ways we cannot always trace or explain." Elena left the hospital that afternoon, more convinced than ever that Nathaniel stood somehow behind this mysterious act of kindness, though she still could not fully understand why a man of his standing would concern himself so deeply with her family's troubles. After a single brief conversation at a charity market, she decided, almost impulsively, that she needed to see him again, needed to ask him directly and read the truth in his expression, rather than continue guessing in silence. She learned through casual conversation with a fellow seamstress that the Ashcombe family regularly attended Sunday services at the Grand Cathedral in the city center, arriving each week in their distinctive carriage, marked with the hawk crest she now recognized instantly. Elena rarely attended such services herself, given the demands of her work and Daniel's care, but that Sunday, she dressed in her cleanest dress and made her way to the cathedral steps, arriving early enough to watch the wealthy families filter inside. She spotted Nathaniel almost immediately, walking beside Charlotte, both dressed in fine but understated clothing, befitting the solemnity of the occasion. Her heart raced as she considered approaching him directly, though her nerve nearly failed her entirely as he drew closer. She stepped forward anyway, positioning herself where he could not easily avoid noticing her. Nathaniel's expression shifted the moment he saw her, surprise quickly followed by something warmer, something that looked remarkably like genuine happiness at the unexpected sight of her. "Miss Marsh," he said, stepping away from the crowd entering the cathedral. "I did not expect to see you here." "I did not expect to come," she admitted honestly, "but I needed to speak with you." Charlotte, sensing the private nature of the conversation about to unfold, offered a polite excuse and continued into the cathedral alone, leaving the two of them standing together on the busy steps, surrounded by the murmur of arriving worshippers. Elena studied his face carefully, searching for any flicker of guilt or recognition, as she asked her question directly. "My brother's treatment has been paid for by an anonymous benefactor," she said. "I have reason to believe that benefactor might be you." Nathaniel's expression remained carefully composed, though a slight tension appeared around his eyes that told her everything she needed to know before he even spoke a word. "Why would you suspect such a thing?" he asked carefully, avoiding a direct answer. "Because generosity like that does not simply appear from nowhere," she said. "Because you have shown unusual interest in my life since the moment we met at the market. Because I cannot think of anyone else in this city wealthy enough, or strange enough, to care so deeply about a stranger's troubles." Nathaniel remained silent for a long moment, clearly weighing whether to continue the careful deception Dr. Whitfield had helped maintain, or to finally reveal the truth that had been building between them since the moment Edmund confirmed her identity. Something in Elena's steady, searching gaze convinced him that further deception would only damage whatever fragile connection had begun growing between them. "Yes," he finally admitted quietly. "It was me." Elena felt a complicated wave of emotions crash through her chest, relief mixing uncomfortably with confusion, and something close to embarrassment at having received such enormous charity from a man she barely knew. "But why?" she asked. "We met only once, briefly, at a market. Why would you concern yourself so deeply with my family's troubles?" Nathaniel hesitated, torn between revealing the full truth about the satchel and protecting the secret contained within those letters even now. He decided, standing there on the cathedral steps with genuine confusion and hurt visible in Elena's expression, that partial honesty would only create further distance between them. "Because I know what you did," he said quietly. "I know you found my satchel at the train station. I know you returned it without taking a single coin, despite everything you and your brother needed. I owed you a debt far greater than any medical treatment could repay." Elena's breath caught sharply in her throat, stunned that he had somehow discovered her secret, despite her careful efforts to remain anonymous. "How did you know it was me?" she whispered. "A torn thread caught on the clasp, matching the fabric of your coat," he explained. "Combined with the description given by my gatekeeper and Edmund's careful inquiries throughout the city, the truth became clear rather quickly. I searched for you deliberately, Elena. I wanted to understand who would choose honesty over such desperate need." Elena stood in stunned silence, processing the revelation that he had known her identity long before their supposedly chance meeting at the charity market. "Was our meeting at the market truly an accident?" she asked slowly, suspicion creeping back into her voice. "Or did you seek me out deliberately, knowing exactly who I was?" Nathaniel met her gaze steadily, unwilling to add further deception to a moment already heavy with revealed truth. "I sought you out deliberately," he admitted. Though what happened between us that afternoon, the conversation, the connection I felt, none of that was calculated or false. I did not expect to feel what I felt, meeting you properly for the first time. Elena studied his face carefully, searching for sincerity behind his words, torn between anger at the deception and a reluctant understanding of his motivations. A part of her recognized that his search, however unsettling in its secrecy, had come from a place of genuine gratitude rather than manipulation. Yet another part of her bristled at having been observed and researched without her knowledge or consent. Her private struggles laid bare before a man whose world remained entirely foreign to her own. "I need time to think about all of this," she finally said, stepping back slightly. "This is a great deal to absorb all at once." "Of course," Nathaniel said quickly, respecting the distance she placed between them despite his evident reluctance to let the conversation end there. "Take whatever time you need, Elena. I only ask that you allow me the chance to properly explain myself when you feel ready to listen." Elena nodded once, then turned and walked away from the cathedral steps, leaving Nathaniel standing alone amid the continuing flow of worshippers entering the grand building behind him. She did not look back, her mind spinning with questions and emotions she could not yet fully untangle, unaware that the full truth behind the letters she had once held in her hands, and the secret Nathaniel had spent years protecting, remained still entirely hidden from her, waiting for a moment neither of them could yet anticipate. As she walked home through the quiet Sunday streets, Elena found herself torn between gratitude for her brother's recovery and unease over how thoroughly her private life had been examined without her knowledge. She thought of Nathaniel's steady gaze, the sincerity that seemed to underline his admission despite the secrecy surrounding it, and wondered, despite her better judgment, whether she might eventually find it within herself to forgive the careful investigation that had led him to her doorstep in the first place. What she could not have known, walking home with her thoughts still tangled and uncertain, was that the true depth of Nathaniel's secret, the one hidden within those sealed letters she had once held but never opened, remained about to surface in a way that would test both of their hearts far more severely than anything that had come before. Nearly 2 weeks passed before Elena agreed to see Nathaniel again, though during that time he had not pressed her further, respecting the boundary she had drawn on the cathedral steps despite his obvious eagerness to explain himself more fully. He sent no messages, no gifts, nothing that might feel like an attempt to purchase her forgiveness or affection. He simply waited, allowing her the space she had requested, though the waiting cost him more patience than he had ever needed to summon in his entire life. The invitation, when it finally came, arrived through Charlotte rather than directly from Nathaniel himself. She visited Elena's neighborhood personally, an unusual choice for someone of her standing, and knocked politely on the apartment door one afternoon, while Elena sat mending a stack of garments by the window. "Forgive the intrusion," Charlotte said warmly when Elena opened the door, clearly startled by her unexpected visitor. "My brother does not know I am here. I came because I believe there are things you deserve to understand, things he has struggled to explain properly himself." Elena hesitated, uncertain whether to invite this stranger from such a different world into her modest home, though something in Charlotte's genuine expression convinced her to open the door fully. "Please, come in," she said, "though I have little to offer beyond tea." "Tea would be lovely," Charlotte said, settling into the small chair Elena offered while glancing briefly around the humble but carefully kept apartment. Once they were both seated with steaming cups between them, Charlotte began speaking carefully, choosing her words with obvious deliberation. "My brother has carried a heavy secret for many years," she began, "one that predates even our father's passing. I do not know the full details myself, though I have long suspected something significant remains hidden, something connected to letters he keeps locked away and never discusses, even with me." Elena listened intently, remembering the sealed papers she had glimpsed briefly inside the satchel that night at the train station, the letter addressed to someone named Nathaniel, signed by an unfamiliar woman, mentioning a child born in secret. "I saw those letters," Elena admitted quietly. "Only briefly, and I did not read them fully, but I saw enough to understand they concerned something deeply private, something about a child." Charlotte's expression shifted with surprise, quickly followed by understanding. "Then you likely know more than I do," she said. "Nathaniel has never spoken openly about this matter, not even to me, though I have watched it weigh upon him for years, shaping decisions I never fully understood until recently." Why are you telling me this now? Elena asked carefully. Because I believe my brother cares for you deeply, Charlotte said honestly. And because I believe secrets like this one have a way of destroying whatever they touch, if left buried too long. If you and Nathaniel are to build any kind of genuine connection, he will need to trust you with the full truth eventually, rather than continuing to hide behind careful half-explanations. Elena considered Charlotte's words carefully, grateful for her honesty despite the uncertainty it stirred within her. Would you tell me, if you knew the full truth? She asked. Charlotte offered a small, sad smile. I would tell you to ask him directly, she said gently. Some truths need to come from the person carrying them, not secondhand through a sister who only holds fragments of the whole story. After Charlotte departed that afternoon, Elena sat alone with her tea growing cold beside her, turning the conversation over repeatedly in her mind. She thought of Daniel, healthy and recovering steadily in the next room, thanks to Nathaniel's quiet generosity. She thought of the honest, searching expression on Nathaniel's face when he had admitted seeking her out deliberately, the vulnerability visible beneath his careful composure. Whatever secret he carried, whatever truth remained locked within those sealed letters, she found herself wanting to understand it fully, rather than allowing suspicion and uncertainty to keep them permanently apart. She sent word to the manor the following day, a simple note delivered by a young messenger boy, requesting that Nathaniel visit her at her apartment, rather than summoning her once more to unfamiliar territory. She wanted this conversation, whatever truth it might reveal, to happen on ground where she felt steady and secure. Nathaniel arrived that evening, dressed plainly once again, standing somewhat awkwardly outside her modest apartment door, as though uncertain whether his presence there might draw unwanted attention from her neighbors. Elena welcomed him inside, gesturing toward the same small chair Charlotte had occupied only the day before. I spoke with your sister, Elena began, deciding directness would serve them both better than careful circling. She told me you carry a secret involving letters, a secret connected to a child. I believe it is time you told me the truth, Nathaniel, if we are to move forward from wherever this strange beginning has left us. Nathaniel sat in silence for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly together, clearly gathering courage before finally speaking. Years ago, before my father passed, he explained slowly, I fell deeply in love with a woman named Sophia, a woman far beneath my family's social standing according to the rigid expectations of our world. My father forbade any possibility of marriage between us, threatening to disown me entirely if I pursued the relationship further. Elena listened without interruption, sensing the difficulty behind each word he spoke. We continued seeing each other in secret regardless, he continued, and eventually, Sophia became pregnant with my child. When my father discovered the truth, his anger proved far more severe than I had anticipated. He arranged for Sophia to leave the city entirely, providing her with enough money to live comfortably elsewhere, on the strict condition that she never reveal the child's true parentage, and that I never attempt to see either of them again. Elena's chest tightened with sympathy as she watched pain flicker across Nathaniel's careful expression, pain clearly held tightly beneath years of enforced silence. I have a daughter, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. She would be nearly 7 years old now. I have never met her. My father ensured that any attempt to reach out would result in immediate and permanent estrangement from the family, and while I despised his decision, I also feared, foolishly perhaps, what such estrangement might mean for my ability to protect and provide for her from a distance, through resources he controlled entirely. The letters, Elena said softly, understanding dawning across her features. They were from Sophia. Nathaniel nodded. The last correspondence I received from her, he explained, along with details about our daughter's well-being and an address where she currently lives with Sophia in a distant town. I kept them close, along with funds I intended to send anonymously to support them, hidden away in that satchel, because I trusted no one else in my household with such a dangerous secret. Elena absorbed this revelation slowly, understanding now the full weight of what she had unknowingly protected that night at the train station, and the depth of vulnerability Nathaniel had exposed by finally sharing this truth with her. Why did you never seek her out yourself, once your father passed? Elena asked gently. You are the Duke now. No one holds authority over your choices any longer. Nathaniel's expression clouded with a guilt he had clearly carried for years. Fear, he admitted honestly. Fear that showing up after so many years of silence might do more harm than good, might disrupt whatever stable life Sophia has built for our daughter in my absence. Fear that society's judgment, even now, might follow my daughter throughout her life if her true parentage became publicly known. I have told myself these fears protect her, though I suspect, in truth, they have mostly protected my own comfort, my own reputation. Elena reached across the small distance between them, placing her hand gently over his. That fear is understandable, she said softly. But a daughter deserves to know her father, Nathaniel, regardless of what complications that truth might bring. Hiding from her will not protect her forever. Eventually, she will grow old enough to ask her own questions, and silence will only cause deeper pain than honesty ever could. Nathaniel looked up at her, something raw and grateful visible in his expression. You returned those letters without ever using them against me, he said quietly. You could have exposed everything, could have demanded anything you wanted in exchange for silence, and instead you simply walked away, protecting a secret you did not even fully understand yet. It was never mine to expose, Elena said simply. Some truths belong only to the people carrying them, until they choose to share the weight with someone else. Nathaniel studied her face for a long moment, something shifting visibly behind his eyes, a decision forming that had clearly been building since the moment he first learned her identity. Will you help me find the courage to finally reach out to her? He asked quietly. To my daughter. I do not think I can face this alone any longer, and something about your honesty makes me believe I might finally have the strength to do what I should have done years ago. Elena squeezed his hand gently, moved by the vulnerability behind his request. I will help you in whatever way I can, she promised. Though this journey, difficult as it may be, must ultimately be one you walk yourself, Nathaniel. I can only stand beside you as you take those first steps. As the evening light faded outside her small window, Elena and Nathaniel sat together in comfortable, understanding silence, both aware that the true weight of the secret she had once unknowingly protected now bound them together in ways far deeper than either could have anticipated when their paths first crossed at that quiet, rain-soaked train station. Weeks passed as Nathaniel prepared himself for the journey he had avoided for nearly 7 years, gathering courage slowly, with Elena's steady support beside him throughout the process. He wrote to Sophia first, a careful letter explaining his intention to finally meet their daughter, acknowledging the years of silence, and expressing genuine remorse for the pain his absence had likely caused them both. Sophia's response arrived nearly 2 weeks later, cautious, but ultimately welcoming, explaining that their daughter, named Grace, had grown into a curious and gentle child who had recently begun asking questions about her father that Sophia no longer felt comfortable avoiding. Elena accompanied Nathaniel on the long carriage journey to the distant town where Sophia and Grace now lived, though she remained careful to give him space for what would undoubtedly prove an emotional reunion, choosing to wait nearby rather than intrude upon such a private moment. Nathaniel's hands trembled as the carriage finally rolled to a stop outside a modest but well-kept cottage, its garden filled with blooming flowers and a small swing hanging from the branch of an old oak tree. Sophia opened the door before he even reached it, her expression guarded but not unkind, years of careful distance visible in the cautious way she studied him. Nathaniel, she said simply. Sophia, he replied, his voice tight with emotion he struggled to contain. Thank you for allowing this. She stepped aside, gesturing him inside, where a small girl with dark curling hair sat at a table, drawing carefully with a set of colored pencils. Grace looked up curiously as the stranger entered, her expression open and unguarded in the way only young children could manage around unfamiliar adults. Grace, Sophia said gently, kneeling beside her daughter. This is Nathaniel. He is your father. Grace studied him with wide, curious eyes, her small head tilting slightly as she processed this unexpected information. You look like the picture, she said simply, pointing toward a small framed portrait on the mantel that Nathaniel had not initially noticed. Nathaniel's breath caught sharply at the sight of it, a small painted portrait Sophia had apparently kept all these years, showing him as a much younger man, standing beside her during happier times before his father's intervention tore them apart. He knelt slowly beside Grace's chair, meeting her curious gaze with careful gentleness. I am sorry it took me so long to meet you, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I hope, if you will allow it, that we might have the chance to know each other properly now. Grace considered this for a long moment, with the serious thoughtfulness only children seemed capable of summoning, before offering a small, uncertain smile. "Do you want to see my drawing?" she asked, holding up a colorful picture of a garden filled with flowers and birds. Nathaniel felt tears threatening behind his eyes as he studied his daughter's careful artwork, overwhelmed by the simple, uncomplicated acceptance she offered him. Despite years of absence, he could never fully explain to a child so young. "It is beautiful, Grace," he said honestly. "You have quite a talent." The afternoon passed slowly and carefully, filled with small moments of connection, as Nathaniel began the delicate process of building a relationship with the daughter he had avoided meeting for far too long. Sophia watched from a respectful distance, her guarded expression gradually softening as she observed the genuine warmth developing between father and daughter, though careful boundaries remained clearly understood between the adults regarding their own complicated history. Elena waited nearby throughout the afternoon, eventually joining them for a simple meal Sophia prepared, the four of them sitting together in a scene that felt strangely peaceful, despite the complicated emotions underlying it. Grace took an immediate liking to Elena, chattering excitedly about her drawings and asking endless questions about the city Elena called home. As evening approached and the carriage prepared for the journey back, Nathaniel knelt once more beside Grace, promising to return soon and often, determined this time to keep every promise he made to her. "I will write to you," he said, "and I will visit whenever Sophia allows it. I do not intend to disappear from your life again, Grace. Not ever." Grace threw her small arms around his neck in an unexpected embrace, and Nathaniel felt something long broken inside himself finally beginning to heal, held together by the simple, uncomplicated love of a child who had every reason to resent him, yet chose instead to offer forgiveness freely. On the journey home, Elena watched Nathaniel's face carefully, noticing the profound shift that had taken place within him over the course of that single afternoon. "You seem different," she observed gently. "I feel different," he admitted, lighter, somehow, despite everything that remains unresolved. "I spent so many years believing that silence protected everyone involved, when in truth, it only protected my own fear of facing what I had done." Elena reached across the carriage and took his hand gently. "Grace clearly holds no resentment toward you," she said. "Children often understand forgiveness far more easily than adults allow themselves to manage. Perhaps that is a lesson worth remembering as you move forward from here." Nathaniel studied her thoughtfully, gratitude, and something deeper visible in his expression, as the carriage rolled steadily back toward the city. "I could not have found the courage to face this without you beside me," he said honestly. "You returned my fortune without a word, protected a secret you barely understood, and then helped me find the strength to finally set things right. I do not know how I could ever properly repay such generosity." Elena smiled softly, shaking her head gently at his words. "You already have," she said. "Daniel is healthy again because of your kindness. That debt was settled long before this journey began. Whatever exists between us now, Nathaniel, exists simply because we choose it, not because either of us owes the other anything further." As the carriage continued its journey back toward the city lights beginning to glow faintly on the distant horizon, Nathaniel found himself contemplating a future he had never fully allowed himself to imagine before, one where honesty replaced years of careful secrecy, and where the quiet strength of the woman seated beside him had become as essential to his life as the very air he breathed. He knew that difficult conversations still remained ahead, conversations with society, with his household staff, with the wider world that would eventually need to understand and accept both his daughter's existence and whatever future he hoped to build alongside Elena. Yet for the first time in years, those challenges felt manageable rather than overwhelming, softened considerably by the genuine connections he had finally allowed himself to build, both with the daughter he had avoided for too long, and with the remarkable woman whose simple act of honesty had set every subsequent event into motion. News of the Duke's newly acknowledged daughter spread through the upper circles of the city faster than Nathaniel had anticipated, carried along the usual channels of gossip that flowed through drawing rooms and dinner parties among the wealthy families who had long speculated about his private life. He had expected harsh judgment, perhaps even social exile from certain circles that valued rigid propriety above genuine human connection, and he braced himself carefully for whatever consequences his honesty might bring. The reaction, when it finally arrived, proved more complicated than he had anticipated. Some families did indeed distance themselves, whispering behind gloved hands about scandal and impropriety, refusing invitations to the manor, that they would have eagerly accepted only months before. Yet others, surprisingly, offered quiet respect for his willingness to finally claim his daughter openly, rather than continuing the pattern of denial that had governed similar situations throughout the city's history for generations. Charlotte stood firmly beside her brother throughout this period of adjustment, hosting a small gathering at the manor, specifically to introduce Grace to the family's closer connections. Determined to demonstrate through action, rather than mere words, that the family fully embraced this new chapter, without shame or hesitation. "She is a remarkable child," Charlotte said warmly to Nathaniel one evening, as they watched Grace explore the manor's extensive gardens during one of her regular visits. Elena, walking patiently beside her, answering endless questions about the various flowers and plants they encountered along the winding paths. "You made the right choice, bringing her into our lives properly at last." Nathaniel watched his daughter's delighted laughter carry across the garden, feeling a warmth in his chest that had been entirely absent from his life during the long years of secrecy and avoidance. "I only wish I had found this courage years earlier," he admitted. "Grace lost valuable time with our family that I can never fully reclaim for her." "She has time ahead of her still," Charlotte reminded him gently. "That matters far more than time already lost." Meanwhile, Elena's own life had transformed considerably since that fateful night at the train station. Though she remained careful to maintain her independence throughout the growing relationship between herself and Nathaniel. She continued her sewing work, though Daniel's full recovery had eased the financial pressure that once threatened to overwhelm them both, and she had begun teaching basic sewing skills to other struggling families in her neighborhood, determined to pass along whatever stability she had gained to others facing similar hardships. Daniel himself had grown remarkably close to Grace during the months following Nathaniel's reunion with his daughter, the two children forming an easy friendship despite the significant difference in their social circumstances. Daniel often accompanied Elena on her visits to the manor, spending afternoons exploring the extensive grounds alongside Grace, while the adults handled more serious matters within the house. "You seem happy here," Daniel observed one afternoon as he and Elena walked home together after one such visit, the manor's gates fading into the distance behind them. "I am happy," Elena admitted, somewhat surprised by how easily the words came to her. "Though I never expected happiness to arrive in such an unexpected form, connected to a fortune I once held in my hands, and chose to return without a second thought." Daniel smiled knowingly, wise beyond his years despite his young age. "Perhaps that is exactly why happiness found you," he suggested, "because you chose honesty when dishonesty would have been so much easier." Elena considered her brother's words carefully, recognizing the truth within them even as she continued walking the familiar streets that had once felt so heavy with desperation and uncertainty. Everything had changed since that rainy night at the station, transformed gradually through a series of choices, both hers and Nathaniel's, that had ultimately drawn two very different worlds together in ways neither of them could have predicted. Nathaniel proposed to Elena nearly a year after their first meeting at the charity market, choosing a quiet moment in the same garden where Grace had spent so many happy afternoons exploring, rather than any grand public gesture that might have felt more fitting for someone of his social standing. He knelt before her beneath the same old oak tree where Grace's swing now hung, having been specially installed at the manor for her regular visits. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by wealth and privilege," he said, holding her hands gently in his own. "Yet I never understood true richness until I met a woman who returned a fortune without asking for anything in exchange, who protected secrets she barely understood, and who taught me that honesty and courage matter far more than any title or inheritance ever could. Elena Marsh, will you allow me the honor of spending the rest of my life learning from your example?" Elena, overwhelmed with emotion, accepted without hesitation, tears of genuine happiness sliding down her cheeks as Nathaniel rose to embrace her fully for the first time, their future finally secure and openly acknowledged before the world that had once threatened to keep them permanently apart. Their wedding took place several months later, a modest but joyful celebration, attended by an unusual mixture of wealthy nobility and humble neighbors from Elena's old street, all gathered together in genuine celebration of a union built upon honesty rather than social calculation. Margaret, Elena's elderly neighbor who had once brought her soup during the darkest days of financial struggle, sat proudly near the front of the gathering, tears of happiness visible on her weathered face throughout the ceremony. Daniel served as a young attendant during the celebration, his health fully restored, his future now secured, through opportunities that Nathaniel's support had made possible, including proper schooling that would eventually allow him to pursue whatever path in life he chose for himself. Grace, delighted by the festivities, danced happily throughout the reception, entirely secure now in her place within a family that had finally, fully embraced her without reservation or shame. As the celebration continued late into the evening, Nathaniel found a quiet moment to speak privately with Elena, both of them standing together beneath the same stars that had once watched her walk home alone from that rainy train station, carrying a fortune she had chosen to return without a single word of explanation. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked softly. "The night everything truly began between us, though neither of us understood it yet." "Constantly," Elena admitted, smiling gently as she looked up at him. "I think about how easily I could have made a different choice, how different both our lives might have become, had I simply kept what I found and walked away." "I am endlessly grateful you did not," Nathaniel said, pulling her closer against him. "That single choice, made alone in the darkness with no one watching, changed the entire course of my life, and gave me back a daughter I nearly lost forever, alongside a partner whose integrity I will spend the rest of my life striving to deserve." Elena rested her head against his shoulder, watching Grace and Daniel laughing together nearby, surrounded by family both old and new, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over her that she had never truly known during the long years of struggle that once defined her existence. Whatever fortune she had once held briefly in her hands that rainy night, she now understood, had been nothing compared to the far greater wealth she had ultimately gained through the simple, quiet choice to remain honest, even when honesty demanded everything she had to give. The story of the seamstress who returned a duke's fortune without a word became a quiet legend throughout the city in the years that followed, whispered among households both wealthy and poor, as an example of the profound difference a single honest choice could make, not only for the person who made it, but for every life it eventually touched, in ways no one could have possibly predicted on that dark, rain-soaked evening when it all began. 5 years passed, and the manor that had once felt cold and formal to Elena during her earliest visits now buzzed constantly with warmth and laughter, transformed entirely by the family that had grown to fill its many rooms. Grace, now 12 years old, had grown into a bright and confident young woman, splitting her time between the manor and Sophia's cottage, both households now bound together through careful friendship rather than the painful distance that had once separated them. Sophia visited regularly, and though she and Nathaniel had long since settled into a comfortable, respectful friendship rather than romance, she remained a cherished part of the extended family that Elena had helped build. Daniel, now nearly grown himself, had discovered a genuine talent for architecture during his studies, spending long hours sketching designs for buildings he hoped to construct someday, buildings that would provide affordable, dignified housing for families who had once struggled the way he and Elena had struggled together in their small apartment near the textile district. Nathaniel supported his ambitions fully, arranging for him to apprentice under one of the city's most respected architects, determined that Daniel's future would never again be limited by the poverty that had once threatened to consume him entirely. Elena herself had expanded her charitable work considerably over the years, establishing a proper workshop near the old textile district, where struggling seamstresses could learn new skills, access fair wages, and support their own families, without depending upon the unpredictable generosity of wealthy clients, who often paid poorly for skilled work. She named the workshop after her mother, whose quiet wisdom had first guided her toward honesty on that rainy night so many years earlier, and she visited it personally several times each week, never losing touch with the community that had shaped her into the woman she had become. One afternoon, as autumn leaves drifted lazily across the manor's expansive gardens, Elena sat with Nathaniel on the same bench near the old oak tree where he had once proposed, watching Grace and a group of younger cousins chase each other playfully across the lawn, while golden light filtered gently through the changing leaves above them. "Do you remember the fear you carried, all those years ago, before you finally reached out to Grace?" Elena asked softly, resting her head against his shoulder as they watched the children play. "I remember it vividly," Nathaniel admitted. "I convinced myself that silence protected everyone involved, when in truth, it only protected my own comfort. I am endlessly grateful that you helped me understand the difference before it was too late to make things right." Elena smiled, watching Grace laugh brightly as she spun one of her younger cousins in a playful circle. "She has grown into someone truly remarkable," she observed. "Confident, kind, unafraid to speak her own truth. I think that courage comes directly from watching her father finally find his own. Nathaniel took her hand gently, lacing his fingers through hers, as they had done countless times over the years, since that fateful charity market meeting had first drawn their separate worlds together. "And what of you?" he asked. "Do you have any regrets about the path that brought us here, beginning with a rainy night and a fortune you chose to walk away from?" Elena considered the question seriously, though her answer came easily, shaped by years of genuine happiness that had followed that single difficult choice. "Not a single regret," she said honestly. "That fortune could have solved our immediate troubles for a time, certainly, but it could never have given us this. Family, purpose, a life built upon honesty rather than desperation. I would make the same choice again, without hesitation, even knowing everything that difficult night would eventually cost me before it gave me everything I truly needed in return." As the afternoon light softened further into the gentle glow of early evening, the family gathered together for a simple meal beneath the old oak tree, laughter and easy conversation flowing freely among wealthy relatives and humble friends alike. The rigid boundaries that had once separated their different worlds, long since dissolved through years of genuine connection and shared experience. Margaret, now considerably older but still sharp-witted and warm-hearted, remained a regular presence at these gatherings, having become something of an honorary grandmother to both Grace and the children Elena and Nathaniel had since welcomed into their own growing family. She often told the story of that rainy night to anyone willing to listen, embellishing certain details with each retelling, though the core truth always remained exactly the same. A young woman, desperate and afraid, had found a fortune capable of solving every problem she faced, and had chosen instead to walk it back through the darkness, asking for nothing in return, except the simple, quiet peace of having done what she knew to be right. That single choice, made alone on a rain-soaked platform, with no one watching and everything to lose, had rippled outward across years and lives in ways no one could have predicted, touching not only Elena and Nathaniel, but Daniel's future, Grace's childhood, Sophia's healing, and countless struggling families who now found dignity and opportunity through the workshop Elena had built in her mother's honored memory. As darkness finally settled fully over the manor gardens that evening, the lanterns strung carefully among the old oak branches flickered warmly to life, illuminating a family gathered together not through calculated advantage or social obligation, but through genuine bonds forged from honesty, courage, and the simple, profound understanding that true wealth had never truly been measured in coins or titles, but in the quiet strength of choosing integrity, even when integrity demanded absolutely everything a person had to give. And somewhere within that warm circle of lantern light and gentle laughter, Elena Marsh, now Elena Ashcombe, sat surrounded by everyone she loved most in the world, finally and completely at peace with the extraordinary journey that had begun with nothing more than an abandoned satchel and a decision, made quietly in the dark, to do what was right rather than what was easy.